This is on the Quick Speed Shop. Check it out. Bam! The 1940 Mercury's got the new rear suspension in it. Let's take a closer look. I'm a professional. Don't try this at home. Alright, as you can see, it's all back on the ground here. The suspension's in. The car rolls back and forth. Let's go ahead and I'll show you how I did everything to get to this stage. Okay, so today's the day we're going to roll the rear end under this thing and see how it's going to look, and hopefully maybe get it mounted up in the car. But the first thing I had to do is get the mounts ready. So these are the rear mounts here. These bolt on to a kit that bolts onto a 35 to 40 Ford frame. This is the rear one for the shackle mount, and the frames are tapered, so this bolts on here a bunch of places. And it's not going to work for my custom frame rails. These got like a shape down the side of them there because of the shape of the rails and stuff. So I was going to save these in case I need them for another project, but guess what? The only thing I would have would be these, and I would still need the springs and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these up because I can use them now on this car instead of building new mounts. So we're going to go ahead and cut these up. So what I got to do is cut the these tabs off here on the top, and then I'm just going to cut the bracket and just take about this much of it out of here and use it so you can weld these right to the bottom of the new frame rails. So I just got to cut this real fast and then move all this junk out of the way. We'll get the rear end rolling up under the car, and we'll see if we can jack it up into place and see how it's going to look. Okay, so I got these pieces all cut off here. I ground them down where they're going to weld to the frame, and both cleaned up real nice, so we're going to be able to use these good. So these go right here up on the shackles like this here, and they're going to weld right up. So I got to get the rear end into the car next, and actually put these on here while we're thinking about it. The tires are too big to fit under the body, so I got to pull them off. I'm going to set the rear end on this dolly. We're going to slide it up in here. Let me go ahead and put the shackle up on here, or the mount up on here while we're at it. Yeah, there. I don't know who makes this bolt-in leaf spring kit for Ford, so I'm not sure. There's a couple of brands that make them. I'm not sure whose this is, but this one uses like Ford-style shackles and bushings on it. Probably from like a Mustang or something. They're pretty short. If you want to adjust this, you can get like Pinto shackles, which are longer, but they're the same setup like this. But we'll stick with these short shackles for now. I think it'll be alright. So this is under the car. Yeah, this thing's going to sit pretty low. I'm not going to be able to figure that out until we set it on the ground. But let me bang the wheels off, and then we'll try sliding this thing up under here. Probably about something like that. Oh, hi, how are you? Okay, I'm going to get some jack stands. I'm going to set this thing up on some stands so I can get the floor jack under the center of it. Then I think we'll start to pick it up and try to put it somewhat in place. Maybe put the wheels back on it and just try and get this thing kind of lined up where it's got to go. It's roughly where it needs to go, straight here, but ouch! Not going to be able to tell until I get the wheels on it. Alright, so check this out. After a bunch of monkeying around, of jockeying around back and forth and jacking up, I got the rear end just kind of laid up in here. Now on the back, I've got the shackles collapsed here just because it made it easier for me to hold it up with the jack. But I want to locate the front location first for the front mounts and get the axle center line back figured out first. And then I can drop it. Once I get that tacked in place, I can drop this down and attach the shackles. I'll probably put them straight up with no load on the suspension, so when then the car gets jacked down, it'll lean the shackle ahead. Actually, I'm sorry. Instead of putting them straight up and down, I'm going to lean them ahead just a couple degrees, so when the weight of the car is on, it'll run the shackle back, and it'll work that way. I've got tons of suspension travel here with the frame. Now, I think the rear end is going to be a little bit tall. I think I'm going to end up have to put lowering blocks in it, but we won't know that for sure till I set the car down. But right now, just by looking at the way the tire is in the fender, I think it's going to need to go down just a little bit with some blocks. But for first mock-up, it looks good. I've got the wheel just setting up on here. It's centered real nice on the wheel well. These wheel wells are pretty short in the fenders on a Mercury, so the tire, you know, the car is up in the air pretty ways. The prostreet tires were way up here in the fenders. The center line of the axle was about here, so the axle is down more than it was with the prostreet tires. But I'm not going to know for sure without setting the car down. But when the weight goes on, it'll probably go down a little bit. I want a little bit of hot rod rake on the car, but I don't want it like way up in the air like this, so we'll have to see how it's going to look once the weight gets on. The car is on the ground. They'll tell me how much I got to lower the rear end, if I have to do it at all. One thing I can see right away is, the pinion angle is looking down. You know, the transmission of the car is looking down the other way. So you want your pinion angles to be opposite and parallel to each other. So let's say the transmission angle is looking down 5 degrees. The rear end wants to be looking up 5 degrees, so they're parallel. Right now this rear end is looking down about 5 degrees or so. So if I make some blocks to adjust the height of the axle, I at least need to make a tapered piece and bring the pinion angle up. So I'm going to have to roll this pinion up about probably 10 degrees overall to keep it to match the transmission. But I'll get into that later with a protractor. We'll work on that. Right now I just want to get the axle line established and get the spring mounts tacked up. Now I cut all these off. These were part of the kit that came with these leaf springs. They originally bolted onto the outside of a Ford frame. This Mercury frame is wider, so these are going to weld to the bottom of the frame itself. And I just kind of got it laid in here. I got to still clean all the paint off this before we get ready to tack it in here. But I'm just doing an initial mock-up right now to see how it's going to lay out. Back here, like I was talking to the shackle mount, this is going to come down. The shackle mount's actually going to get welded on back here somewhere. So this is just real early layout here. Just getting her laid out close, but it's looking promising. The tire fits in the fender well. That's good. So I'm going to monkey around with the dimensions some more, get this thing, it's in here just a little bit crooked. I keep measuring from the center of my frame line. I made a dimension. Originally it was 21 1/8 inches from here to the original axle that was in the car with the prostreet tires. And I'm going to get it close to that with the tape measure, and then I'm going to eyeball the wheel in the fender well itself and make sure that the smaller tire is centered in the fender opening, because the great big tires are sucked up in here, and I'm not sure if they're centered aesthetics wise in the wheel well with the great big wheels and tires. So when I put the smaller tires on, I want to make sure that I get the correct. I might have to move the axle, you know, a 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch back and forth just to get it to look better with a small tire out here. So I got to do a whole bunch of measuring and stuff and get the thing squared up. I got to grind the paint off the frame, because once I get it squared up where I want it to attach the front points, I can tack that in, and then drop the back of it down and get the shackles lined up and tack those in. So I got to probably do a whole bunch of monkeying around with the jack and the stands and get this thing like dialed in. Okay, after a bunch of measuring side to side and crisscross and every which way, I've made my initial tacks here of the front spring mounts. Now I've gone and I've measured from like the center of the back plate. I clamped some angle iron here. I've gone and measured like I clamped some angle iron to the side of the frame like this, and I was able to measure from the backing plate to the angle iron to center the rear end and side to side in the frame rails. I also measured from the fender lip down to like the axle flange to make sure this dimension was the same. I've measured crisscross across the thing from the inside of the backing plate on a common point all the way up into the mid of the frame to one of the holes in the cross member way up there. I've measured, I got 58 inches side to side in a triangle, so that tells me that the thing is pretty much true in the car. I just got a little bit of play in my rear bushings here. I haven't lined these up yet. I've got to pull these just into a place a little bit. The rubber is fighting me just a little bit, but I've got the front laid in good. I've got the, I started on the passenger side, and I centered the wheel exactly in the passenger side fender. And then when I put this tire on, I'll show you in a second, but the tire is just ahead a little bit in the fender well. It's like the same in the back, and I measured the hole in the fender, which I don't think, most of this is the original fender lip here. And it appears that this fender hole is just a little bit wider, about 3/4 of an inch wider up in here, which is probably manufacturing right from Mercury. They probably wasn't perfectly aligned to begin with. And I think on these cars, the wheel well, the tire wasn't even centered in the wheel well. I think originally, if you look at pictures of them, the wheel is like ahead a little bit in the fender to begin with. So I centered it up on the other side because it looked good, and this side is going to be, the tire's going to be just a little bit offset, but the rear end is true to the car, so the difference in the fender and the sheet metal or whatever is different on the car is, I can't change that unless I cut a chunk out of this fender and made this wheel well bigger. But let me slap the tires on and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, this is the driver's side, and you see how the rubber is down here, and the tire is like followed by the fender well, and then it gets a little bit bigger up in here. Let me try straight on here. So it's like the fender right here in this lip, which looks all original on the inside, is a little bit misshapen here, or maybe up in here it's a little bit misshapen, but it's all original metal up in here. So it's kind of like the fender was just stamped that way, because there's no evidence of any repairs or nothing. It's all original metal up in there. But so again, to see what this side looks like. And then over here on the passenger side, see the tire seems to fit the wheel well a lot better. The shape seems to be a little bit more uniform. It's got a little bit more gap here, but this has been repaired down here, so this might have been a little bit tighter. I measure it's just a little bit short, so this, I'm not worried about that. It's more like this shape here appears to be completely different on this fender, but this is also all original metal up in here. So I'm thinking that the fenders are just formed differently on one side of the car from the other. Because, I mean, they bolt to the body in the same spot. It's not like the hole could be moved around. The fender's in the same location, so the lip has got to be just a little bit asymmetrical from one side to the other. You can see that the tire does favor, I mean, this is a small opening to begin with. The 40 Mercuries and 39 Mercuries had a different wheel well opening than the Ford, which had a much larger wheel well hole. And the tire does favor the front edge of the fender. That's just the shape of it, but it's more pronounced on the driver's side. But I'm confident that my rear end is located side to side equally and square in the car because I've done triangulated measurements, and everything seems to line up good. It's going off known points. The axle is not crooked. I mean, the difference that's off on the other side, the axle will have to be like an inch out of square in the car, and it's like within less than a 1/16 of being square to multiple locations. So I'm going to guess that the fender hole is just what's the problem. So I want this side, which looks the best. I got it centered up in the best looking fender, and maybe someday I can repair that driver's side fender, take a little bit out of the lip and try to reshape the opening to make it fit better if I ever do any more paint work on the car. But in the meantime, I guess I'm kind of stuck with what I got for now. I mean, you can see it, the tire still favors the front of the fender just like the other side, but it's like the front of this hole is down a little bit and the back of the hole is up a little bit, and it's just making the wheel, the fender opening not quite the same. You know, if anything, this hole needs to have a little pie cut taken out of it here and move this opening up just a little bit and bring the back of this opening down just a little bit. But I'm going to guess that that fender was just formed that way right from the factory, and you know, these things weren't perfect. They were kicking them out the door. You can only see one side of the car at a time. Probably they just build them that way, and who knows? Or, you know, maybe this is an aftermarket fender, one side or the other, that was formed different. Who knows? I mean, the car's 80 years old. I mean, so who knows what happened. I've had things like this happen before. My 1946 Studebaker truck, the driver's side door was literally too large to fit in the door opening. It hit up in the windshield frame and overhung the rocker panel. And I messed with it. When I built that truck, I had to literally take the rocker panel, take a slice out of the rocker panel, move the door edge down, the jam edge. Then I cut the whole top of the door off, and I had to pie cut it and lean the top of the door and like change the shape of the door to get it to fit in the truck. And I know that was the original door that was on the truck since it was built in 1946. They just, you know, stuck them together, and if the edge of the door gap overhung a little bit, sent it down the road. You know, nobody was making perfect gaps and stuff back in the day. And that might be what's up with this, is the driver's side fender is just a little bit different from the passenger side fender. And the lip is just a little bit different. Unfortunately, this is on the side that I see all the time, but if I move the rear end back to put the tire more centered up in this fender, it would be too far back in the other hole, which would look really obvious. So I'm going to leave it like it is, and if I ever do any paint work or fix any damage on this side, I'll take and I'll cut this fender, and I'll reshape this lip to match the tire, and I'll leave the other side there where it fits perfectly. But you never know when working on old cars, you run into this all the time. You know, they made them cheap commodities to get out the door back in the day, and if you're going down a dusty road in 1940, this car is more than good enough for what you were doing. So I guess it is what it is. You can see up under here, it looks pretty good sitting up under there. I've got plenty of suspension travel. Now next I'm going to work on getting the shackle mounts tacked to the frame. One thing that is a problem is the drive shaft. I held it up, and it's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches too long, because the pinion's longer on this axle than the 8-inch Ford. So I'm going to have to get the drive shaft shortened, which is a bummer because that's like $100. And I also need to change the pinion angle. I'm going to do that with some wedges later, or some tapered blocks. But I want to get the thing tacked up, get the shackles tacked up, and then we're going to set it down on the ground and see how it sits. I think it's time to set the car down. But let me quick show you what I did underneath, and then we'll set it down and see how she looks. Here's the back here. The rear shackle, I went and I put just a little inclination looking rearward on the shackle. Right now all the weight's off the springs pretty much. But when the suspension goes down under compression, the shackle will go back, and then it'll come up almost to center on the rebound. So I got it all tacked in all the way around, and I think it's time to set her on down. So let me set this down, and I'll get the jack out. We'll let her on down. The front's still up on blocks, but we can set the rear down here. Hoop. Going down. Slowly. Oh boy. Uh-oh. Hold on. I'm going to be able to get the jack out from under this. Well, that's... Uh-oh. Look at that. Man, that appears to be low. This appears to be pretty low here in the back. I got to set the front end down. Man, well, I guess it's not too bad if the running board's there. It's just deceiving because it's so far up in the air in the front. But you can see the suspension works good. No way the axle's going to bottom out. Huh. Well, man, that is low. How low can you go? So this is how the car sits right now, with the springs flat, and then when you bounce it, I don't know if you can see that, but they go inverted. And these springs, I don't know what the spring rate is. They're meant for a car about the size of 35 to 40 Ford Sedan. So they're meant for a car that's this size and weight, but they're pretty soft. I mean, they're flat right now, and then they go upside down. So I'm thinking about, I've done this before, like in my Model A hot rod shop truck and my Studebaker truck. I had a local spring company add a couple leaves, and these only have 4 leaves in them. What I like to do is add like another full leaf to get the spring right out to the spring eyes, and then add like a 4th leaf. So I think I'm going to take these springs out, clean up the rust on them, clean them all up, paint them, and then take them to the spring shop and have them put 2 leaves in them, and maybe add just a little bit of arch. And I think I'm also going to go over here on the shackles, which are super short. I think I might switch to Pinto shackles, which should be the same bolts and everything, but they're about 1.5 inches or so longer. And that'll bring the back of the springs down just a little bit. And those two things, combined things, should pick the car up like 1 inch, 1.5 inches. I still need to work on the pinion angle. The pinion's still down some, but if I take the shackles and bring the back of the springs down and arch it a little bit, that'll help a little bit with the pinion angle. So I don't want to change that or change the pads or shim it or anything until I have all the springs set up how they're going to be. Then I'll set the pinion angle at the last thing here. But if I take the jack and I add like 1.5 inches of lift here, about like that, you can see how the spring goes back into an arc like that. So that would help with the extra leaves and the shackles. So I think I want to do that. Look down the side of the car here, you can see like the hot rod rake going on. The tire actually looks a lot better in the fender well being set down a weight on it. So it's off just a little bit, but it's a lot better than it was, so that looks good. You can see how the running boards are almost parallel, and by the time I put the weight of the gas and everything in there, the car would probably sit just about level. And I want it to have just a little bit of hot rod rake going down. So I think I want to pick it up, like I said, about 1 inch, 1.5 inches in the back, and give it just a little bit of rake, and put some more spring into the spring so it can hold a little bit of weight. So if you want to trip and put like 4 adults and luggage and stuff in here with full tank of gas, this thing I bet would squat down pretty good. And I would like to, it's a heavy car, so I think I want to put the extra spring rate in there to help pick it up a lot. I put air shocks in cars before. I don't like to do that because it puts a ton of weight on the spring mounts. You're putting all the force on the bolts and the cross member. I'd rather spend the money and put the money into the springs and have a good set of springs in it. That seems to work out better. Yeah, so overall I'm real happy with the way everything kind of turned out here. It just kind of fell into place. And I think when I do, you know, fix the springs and get it all dialed in, it should work really well and it should ride really nice. I mean, it's got a good spring to it now. It should ride not real stiff. Adding like a leaf or two is going to stiffen it up some, but it's not going to make it like super hard. It won't ride like a 3/4 ton truck or anything. It'll just give it a little more action up in there. And I'm looking for the extra ride height and the weight, but I think it looks good overall. It was a lot of figuring. It took me a couple hours of moving it here and there just a little bit just to get it dialed in. And now it's just all tacked together now. I'm going to get it all set up and kind of laid out, and then I'm going to go ahead and weld everything. I'll pull the rear end back out of the car, weld all the mounts up solid, and do any gusseting or anything I got to do, and then you know, clean up the springs and all that, clean up the rear end, then put the rear end back in. So really good progress in the old Mercury today. Finally got her down back on the wheels with the new rear end and the new springs, and I think it was worth it. I think it's going to look cool. It's going to work good. It's going to drive good, and I can't wait to get this thing back on the road in the spring. But until then, you'll have to stay tuned. We're going to keep working on this and get her all done up over the winter. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I'm putting out new videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Hit the bell for alerts, tell your friends, and I'll see you right back here at the Quick Speed Shop. Still working on the 1940 Mercury Sedan.